Dr. Supercoach YouTube have picked round 6 captaincy recommendations. Last week was interesting. The Boyd emergency scare forced a lot of people into a straight Tom De Koning captain, which looked really bad at quarter time, but then he rallied. Other popular options like Sarong and Midfield also didn't set the world on fire, so I VC'd Tom De Koning because I didn't really think Boyd was going to play. It was a risk, but I thought it was worth the risk. He got 118. I took that. Zorko was going to be my captain, and I just wasn't really feeling it, so I took the 118. And that ended up being a good choice because Zorko was bad, and Tom De Koning was actually my third highest scorer of the round, so I'll take that. Now, let's get into round 6. My vice captains, my number 3 option is Hugh McCluggage. So Collingwood are actually the 5th easiest matchup for inside midfielders over the last 10 games. So I was debating whether I put Lachie Neale or Josh Dunkley here. Then I thought, wait a minute, there's another Lions midfielder who's outdoing them. Hugh's actually the highest scoring Supercoach scorer of 2025 after 5 rounds. How crazy is that? Well, it's time that I reward him with a place in this video. After scores of 132, 136, 156 and 135 in his last month of footy, it's fair to say that McCluggage is in red hot form. That's a month where he hasn't gone essentially under 132. That's insane. And he's also got scores of 123 and 110 on the Pies last year. That wasn't he wasn't in red hot form then. He just liked playing the Pies. So some recent midfielder scores against Collingwood included Heaney's 118, Hewitt's 125, Libber's 142, Rosie's 128, Finn Callahan's 144, and Josh Kelly's 132. So the Pies midfield do give up plenty of points. I think most people will be tipping a Brisbane win here, given it's at the Gabba. Can Hugh continue his hot streak on this one? I don't see why not. Look, if you do own Neale or Dunkley, I think they're also really good VC options, but I think Hugh's earned his spot here on the list. Number 2, VC, Max Gawn. Max is coming off a big 145 against Essendon. Essendon's actually normally a really tough matchup, but with Brian doing his ACL early, Gawn got an easy matchup with Draper and found himself rucking against Harrison Jones at times. I was watching this and there were times where it was Harrison Jones who was literally half of Gawn's size and weight, and he's a little stick man. He just pushed him around. He got like 49 or 50 hit outs, so I'm not surprised that he dominated. That was just easy pickings. Now he matches up with Fremantle, who are the 5th easiest matchup for Ruckman over the last 10 games. Now, I want to point out here that a lot of that is because Sean Darcy's been out, and Luke Jackson and Patrick Voss have been the main ruckman. Those two are very leaky. When fully fit and firing, Sean Darcy is actually a really restrictive ruckman, but he isn't there yet. He's just returning from an injury. He's going to take a while to work back into fitness. I mean, like last week, Sean Darcy only took 63% of Freo's ruck contests, which is well down from what a main ruckman usually takes. So that indicates that he's not fully ready to take the whole load. And Patrick Voss had to take the other 32%. And last week, Toby Nankervis took advantage. He scored a 125 last week. So I expect Max to similarly take advantage this week against an underdone Sean Darcy and a very small Patrick Voss. I do have question marks about whether Max can return to his high score of 2024. Just to the eye test, he looks like he's lost a few steps with age, but given his stellar ruck run coming up, he's still going to post some big ruck scores, including this week. And then my number 1 VC option is Zach Merritt. Zach did his owners proud with a 124 last week, 37 touches, 8 marks, 5 tackles, a great all-round game. And now a matchup with the Eagles, the easiest opponent for inside mids. The Eagles team just allowed 141 to Sam Walsh and 132 to George Hewitt, 117 to Adam Chera and 114 to Patrick Cripps. 4 players going over 110 in the same game. That doesn't happen much. Walsh is probably the closest of those players to Merritt in terms of play style, with his hard running ability and just his ability to get around the ground and rack up in all areas of the ground. Other players of that ilk include Brayshaw, who scored a 131, McCluggage, who scored a 132, and Anderson, who scored a 136. So the Eagles give up huge points to these hard-running midfielders, and Merritt's one of the best of those in the league. A 3-round average of 125 shows that he's in form, and I expect this to be a big win for the Bombers. So don't overthink this one. Lock it in as a safe VC with a huge ceiling. Now, point of difference, captain, pod captain, or vice captain, depending on how you're feeling. Noah Anderson. So my pod captains have started well this year. They've got scores of 136, 162, 128, and last week's 124. This week, I'm going to return to the Gold Coast captain himself, Noah Anderson. Remember, I used Noah as my pod C this year already. In round 1, he netted us a 136 against West Coast. And remember, West Coast are the easiest matchup in the league for midfielders. Well, Richmond are the second easiest, and that's who he plays this week. And I expect Noah to take advantage. Brayshaw just smashed the Tigers for a 155. Oh, and 1 week earlier, Hugh McCluggage hit them with a 156. And that's not even reeling off all the other 120 scores they've given up this year. And as I talked about with Merritt earlier, Brayshaw, McCluggage, Anderson, they all fit into this hard-running elite ball user category. And if those first two that I mentioned have already put up 150s on Richmond in the last fortnight, literally the last 2 games, I'm not willing to bet against Noah Anderson doing the same here. I mean, Noah's last 3 scores against Richmond have netted him 128, 122, and 144. And no, I don't really care that this game isn't being played on the Gold Coast. I think Noah has grown as a player, and the Suns are a much better team this year, that I don't think they're going to have those same home and away split issues that we saw last year. Captain, number 5, Bailey Dale. And I did put Bailey Dale here because I also want to have a bit of a discussion. And it's something I just want to put on people's radar. For a year or two, we've been targeting defenders against St Kilda, and it's been a goldmine. They were the easiest team for opposing defenders. But I think that's changing this year. This is just my observation. Over the last 10 games, the Saints are still a good matchup for wingmen, but they're only just positive for general defenders, and they're essentially neutral for designated kickers. And if we look at their last 5 games, they're actually a negative matchup for designated kickers, the Saints. Now, having said that, Lockie Whitfield and Max Holmes, who they tagged, are probably really the only 2 elite designated kickers that they've played, so maybe it's more a symptom that they haven't faced the Zorkos and the Sinclairs of the world yet. And spoiler alert, the Saints will never play Sinclair this year. But it's just an emerging trend that I'm starting to notice. The Saints may not be as easy for defenders as we think. And I haven't decided whether that's real or not, so I'm going to get some more data, but I think Bailey Dale this weekend is going to give us a really good indication of if Saints are still easy to score against for defenders or not. And I've still got Bailey here as a solid captaincy option, partly because I wanted to talk about that observation, but partly because I still think he scores really well. Under the roof at Marvel, against the Saints team that have given up big scores to wingers and attacking defenders still. Now Dale isn't a wingman, but he does get up the ground and attack. He plays a little bit, I guess, like Lockie Ash, who just had 137 on the Saints last week, so the scoring still can be there. I'm not super confident in this pick, but I think it's going to be a really good test of whether the Saints are still super easy for defenders in 2025 or not. Number 4, Caleb Sarong. Caleb hasn't really taken advantage of the West Coast or Richmond matchups that we would have expected. He only scored low tons in both games. Despite that, he's averaging well over 30 disposals a game in his last 3 matches, and he did have that 142 on the Bulldogs a fortnight ago. He now plays Melbourne, who are the 3rd easiest matchup for inside mids, and who have recently given up scores of 124 to Merritt, 136 to Rao, 127 to Took, and 124 to Tom Powell. Now, like I said, he hasn't taken advantage of the 2 easiest matchups in the game, but can he cash in on the 3rd easiest? 3rd time lucky? Surely he goes big this weekend. Surely. He averages over a ton at the MCG from his 7 games there, and he did have 140 last time he played the Demons. Now, my number 3 option is Matt Rao. Matt Rao's a goat, and not just because he likes to eat grass. Well, it is mainly because he likes to eat grass. He started the year with scores of 137 and 136 against very easy opponents. He then put out a 74 against a hard opponent. But last week, he managed a 126 against North, who are actually a fairly hard opponent for midfielders as well, so that's it promising. But this week, against one of the easiest opponents in the business, a date with the 2nd easiest midfield in the comp in the Tigers. When speaking about his captain, Noah, I already told you about some of the 150 scores Richmond have given up this year, but that isn't all. There's also been a 130 to Will Ashcroft, a 130 to Lachie Neale, a 120 to Jack McRae, a 130 to Connor Rozee, a 123 to Will Drew, and a 120 to Patrick Cripps. And as I mentioned, Rao already has 3 scores over 120 in his 4 games this year. So this looks like a player taking his game to a new level, and I don't think Richmond will be able to handle him. His last 2 games at the MCG as well have led to scores of 136 and 113. Now, my number 2 captaincy option is Lloyd Meek. Meekie makes my captaincy video for the first time this year, and for good reason. He just scored 118 and 105 against 2 hard ruck opponents. And he now gets a matchup with Geelong, who are the 3rd easiest ruck matchup over the last 10 games. Now, let's talk about team sheets. I'm recording this and researching this on the Tuesday, so I don't know what Geelong are going to do in terms of who they're going to select. But talking to some Cats fans, I actually expect Reece Stanley to not play in this one. I assume he played last week because they needed Sam De Koning behind the ball to match up on one of the 3 big Adelaide key forwards, and doubly so because Tom Stewart was out, so Sam De Koning had to play defence. So then Reece came in to battle Riley O'Brien. This week, the matchup is Hawthorn, whose forward line looks very different to Adelaide's. Chol is their only key forward, so I wouldn't be surprised to see Stanley rested to allow SDK to ruck, as he won't be needed in the defence. Like, they're going to need smaller defenders to try and take on this Hawthorn mosquito fleet. I don't think they really want to go big with guys like Blitzarves and Sam De Koning in the back line. So let's pretend Sam De Koning is rucking. SDK is one of the easiest ruck matchups in the league. He only wins the hit out in 40% of his ruck contests. That should leave plenty of hit outs available to Meek, who Lloyd Meek is actually attending the most ruck contests per game this year. So that indicates that Hawthorn are a high stoppage team, and a heap of stoppages against Sam De Koning just screams 3 points for Meekie here. Now, look, if Stanley does play, I'm not really worried. He only wins a hit out in 38% of his ruck contests anyway, so it's not really like he's any better than Sam De Koning. I don't see him slowing Meek down either. The preference is Meek versus Sam De Koning, but if you're a Meek owner and you see Stanley rested, just start licking your lips. This could be a big one. And then my number 1 captaincy option is Andrew Brayshaw. Andrew comes into this round with the 3rd highest SuperCoach total for the season and a 3-round average of 140. When discussing Sarong, I talked about how Melbourne are the 3rd easiest matchup for inside mids, and I illustrated the points they were giving up to midfielders this year. Now for Brayshaw, this is a team that in their final meeting of last year he scored 137 against, and the MCG is also a ground he seems to enjoy playing at. He averages 104 SuperCoach from his 12 games there. That's actually his highest scoring venue that he's played at least or over 3 games at, so he does do well there. For me, this one's a fairly simple equation. A midfielder on a hot streak against a very easy opponent that have all sorts of issues going on. This is an absolute easy captaincy pick for me. Not much more to say on that one. So, they are my favourite 9 captain options this week, but as requested, here's a bunch of names that didn't quite make the cut. I think they're going to have good weeks. I think you could roll with them, especially as a captaincy or a vice captaincy in your draft leagues. Or actually, if you're like me and you don't have any of these 9, that's unfortunate. I'm in that boat, so I'm going to have to go with some of these guys. So I think Lachie Neale and Josh Dunkley will have good games. I think Dane Zorko is a pretty good VC shout. And I like the matchups for LDU. And then the Bombers boys as well. I think Nick Martin could really rack up on the Eagles. Sam Draper as well. I wanted to find a way to sneak him into the video. But if he's solo ruck against West Coast, he just put up a ton against Max Gawn. So Sam Draper could be on the rise here. Maybe you could look at him maybe for draft. Then in the same game, Jordan Ridley as well. I think there'll be plenty of chip marks for him against the Eagles. Then the next game we move on, Jordan Clark I think is a fair option against Richmond. Noah Anderson and Matt Rowell I've talked about, but then their teammates Jared Witts. I think Witsy against Nanku gives up plenty of points as a good option. Then even coming off that half back line, Dan Rioli could be a bit of an option, a smoky in draft anyway. Jordan Sweet has a good matchup. I think he could score well. And then riding it out, the Hawks defenders like Sicily and Amon, I think they could have a good game against Geelong, who've been giving up plenty of points to defenders. So there's a few guys I like there. And that's my round 6 captaincy recommendations. I don't own any of the top 9, so I'm in a bit of a pickle, but I'm going to VC Zorko, see how I go with that. I'll work out a captaincy coming off that. I don't know, maybe I just go to like a Jack McRae or someone in a revenge game that probably won't be tagged. So we'll see. I'll just have faith in Zorko. I think he should get it done for me. Good luck this weekend. I hope you dominate, rise up the ranks, and I'll see you next week.